Part 3. Winter. It snowed. At first the flakes came down soft and slow, and Shade weaved his way around them, fascinated by intricate patterns. He remembered the first time he'd been caught in the rain, and tried to fly between the drops until he was dizzy and exhausted, and very wet anyway. Now he looked up into the sky and was dazzled by the sight, as if the stars were gently falling. "You can drink them," Marina said. "Watch." He began catching the snowflakes in his mouth too, let them melt on his tongue, drinking in midair. He laughed in the light, and the sound startled him. It was 2 nights since they'd left Gotham Throb, and they'd flown steadily, keeping the same course, and not talking much. Tonight was warmer than the last, and there was a rising mist. For an hour or so, he and Marina played in the snow, laughing and rolling through the silver sky, trying to forget. But a wind soon whipped up, driving the snow at a vicious angle so it stung his ears and wings. Their stars had been completely blocked out long ago, and it was impossible for them to keep their course. "We'd better land," Marina said. "We can't see where we're going." When, the next night, he poked his head out from the roost in a high birch, the whole world had been transformed. He was startled by how bright it was. Glowing in the moonlight, the snow blanked the earth in gentle swells, forming hills around the bases of trees and cloaking the branches so they looked soft and fat. The landscape glittered fiercely. Even a second out of the roost he could feel the warmth being sucked through his fur. "Have you felt cold like this before?" he asked, teeth chattering. "Flying's the only way to warm up." There were no smells. It was as if they were frozen too, or maybe it was just the inside of the nose that was frozen. When he wrinkled it up, his nostrils took a few seconds to sink back into place, and it was so quiet. No insect drone, no frogs croak or crickets thrum. Panic seized him. Of course the cold would kill and drive away the insects. Where did they go anyway? Did they migrate too? "What are we going to eat?" "It's okay. There's still food." She showed him. Flying low around the base of the elm, she said, "See that?" He thought it was merely specks of dirt in the smooth snow, until he saw some move. Leap, more like it. "Snow fleas," Marina explained. There were lots of them, and he and Marina moved from tree to tree, snapping them up. "They're not bad," Shade said. "Better than mosquitoes." In an open field she showed him a sack of praying mantis eggs hanging from a twig, which poked up through its snow. And in the spindly branches of a maple, a moth cocoon, coated in silver frost. On a dead tree she showed him where the bark had been eaten away by engraver beetles and carpenter ants, and the insects were still there. You only had to scratch and dig down a bit. It wasn't long before he had a full, warm stomach, and he felt much better. "You're amazing," he said with admiration. She laughed. "It's your first winter. You didn't know." "How'd you learn all this stuff?" She looked away. "My parents taught me." He was sorry he'd reminded her. "Your mother would have taught you too," she added. "It's no big deal." "Well, thanks for showing me," he said. "Sure." He looked up into the sky and picked out their guiding star. It seemed brighter than ever, as did the others, cold, hard flares of light in the blackness. They flew on through the silver night. He thought about his father more than ever now, and sometimes, when he didn't think he could fly another minute, he'd force himself into a hypnotic rhythm, where every beat of his wings was one beat closer to finding him. There, and there, and there. Before, it had given him comfort to think he might be with the humans. Now that was almost as horrible as imagining him with owls. "What was that?" Marina said suddenly. In the distance he picked out dark shapes draped over the bright tree tops. He drew close and his throat tightened. Bat wings. Wings no longer attached to bodies. They were snagged up on spiky branches, littered across the white snow. He started to count and gave up when he hit 60. He could tell by the fringes of fur they were grey wings. "Owls," said Marina. "Must have been lots of them." She pointed out their pallets in the snow. Shade couldn't bring himself to look closer. He knew what he would see there. He circled, staring as if hypnotized. They must have been migrating, and the owls had come and attacked, and who knows how many they killed. And then they'd eaten them right here, tearing off the wing first, because there wasn't enough meat on them. He'd seen Goff and Throb do the same to birds. "They probably didn't know anything," he'd said, choking out the words. "Nothing about the closed skies, and the owls just came along and slaughtered them." "I hate Goff and Throb," Marina said savagely. "This is their fault too. If they hadn't killed those two lousy pigeons in the city, this wouldn't have happened." He'd been afraid of this all along, but he'd lied to himself anyway, telling himself that all the bats would fly on ahead of the owl's command to close the skies. They'd escape for the winter anyway, sleeping safe inside their roosts. But not these grey wings, and who knew how far the owl's messengers had gone now. Maybe even to his own colony. He ground his jaws together. "I wish I were like Goth. I'd kill them all. I really would. I'd just kill them." Marina flew in close, nudging against him gently. "We should get out of here. They might come back." "I want him to come back," he raged. "I want to get one. Just one of them." He was suddenly sobbing, and of his words flooded together. He held his breath, clenching his whole body until it stopped shaking. He took a ragged breath. He wished she hadn't seen him cry. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "For what?" And he saw that her eyes were bright with tears too. "But we really should go." After flying an hour, she asked him, "Do you think they're alive, Goff and Throb?" "You saw that dart hit him." "It's just... they know which way we're going." The thought had never left the back of Shade's mind. That they might be alive, and that it could follow Shade's star. "Even if they're alive, they might have given up and gone due south." Marina nodded eagerly. "They're not built for the cold. Remember how they shivered all the time? I don't think their fur as thick as ours. They don't need it in the jungle." She paused. "You think we should change course, just in case?" "I'd like to," he said. "But we'd just get lost." "What's the next landmark?" she asked. "You didn't tell him that too, did you?" There was a hint of reproach in her voice. "No," he said, offended. "Sound maps are the secret of the colony." Yeah, so what is it?" Shade shut his eyes and tried to calm his tired mind. He watched. The night whirled, scrolling out to the horizon. The land slowly rising, the trees frozen in ice. Rock heaving up into the sky. White peaks. "We go higher," he said to Marina. "The land reaches way up." "Mountains," she said grimly. "There's more." The baying of a wolf. Then, from nowhere, something massive loomed up from the darkness, and all Shade could see was the beast's two pointed ears, surging toward him. "Wolves!" he said with a jolt. "What do you mean?" she asked impatiently. "There's the sound of wolves." It didn't make sense. Why would his mother tell him to seek out wolves? They were the most feared beasts in the north. "We're supposed to go where the wolves are." He shook his head. "It's like we're supposed to go close, because I see one wolf, all white, jumping at me, and the last thing I see is his pointed ears." "That's the landmark, huh?" Marina said. "I'm sorry." "It's next to useless," she snapped. "It doesn't mean anything unless your mother wants you to get eaten." "It's what she sang me," he said firmly. She sighed. Okay. At least we know we're headed for mountains. We've just got to keep going and help you recognize the right place. At least if Goff and Throb are alive, they won't last long up there." She looked at him. "But neither will we." "There's something wrong with my wing," Throb said. He folded it in, pushed it out. "It's gone hard near the tip." Goff yawned. "It's because you're a miserable weakling," he said. He wasn't about to tell Throb about the stiffness of his own wings. However night he had to limber up before taking flight. Cursed this cold. There was no getting away from it. It seeped through his skin and settled deep in his bones. "It doesn't look right," Throb whined, still staring at his wing. Goff looked and saw that the membrane was slightly mottled, like a blister. In the jungle, he'd seen wings rot and fall off, but never anything like these raised sores. "I don't see anything," he grunted, but he quickly checked his own wingtips. They were fine. Throb was weak, that's why his wings were blistering. How long did the winter last? 4 months? Isn't that what Shade had said? He knew they wouldn't survive out in the open for much longer. They'd have to find a warm place. They'd have to reach Hibernaculum. Food was harder to come by. The land was frozen. All Goff had managed to find in the past 2 nights was a squirrel, which he'd rooted out of the hollow in a tree. His eyes stared to throb. He'd lost weight since they left the false jungle, but there was still plenty of meat on him. Saliva gushed into his mouth.
"What?"
Throb asked nervously.
"Nothing,"
said Goth. Throb might still be useful to him. Zots would not let him freeze. He was being tested, and only his cowardice would be punished. Every night they set course by the star Shade had showed him. It was only a matter of time before they overtook him. Tomorrow night they'd catch up. He was sure of it. Then he'd get the rest of the sound map from Shade. And then he'd eat him. He would arrive at Hibernaculum with the sad news of Shade's death and befriend the Silverwings. He would have a warm place to get him through the rest of the winter. And all the food he'd needed.